How's it going, Jethro?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. Good. Just working from home and trying to be positive in a very challenging situation. Yeah. To survive, as they say, and to thrive if possible, right? Like it's
Mm.
already quite challenging in terms of the world that we live in. Um, so I'm trying to, as much as possible, stay positive. I'm trying to, as much as possible, to create, to create like as much as I can
Mm.
across the board, especially in terms of the marketing that we're doing. And so this podcast like is an example of that. We've been interviewing like a lot of different professionals in the business space, the founders so far, because they're the ones that are having to make the biggest decisions and that are having to face the most challenging situation so far. And so, yeah, like it's been very, very busy. It's been very, very busy.
No,
I
it's
think
been
it's
busy
going with
too.
you.
I think you hit on some great points there. I think the one benefit, just to kind of take it for a positive to start with, is that your ability to be able to get everybody at the moment must be very good because you know everybody is. Everybody's at home. No one can be anywhere else.
It's just
there's no
between
there's
Zoom
no
calls,
travel.
right? It's between Zoom calls. It's like, so are they on House Party or are they on Zoom? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Messenger or WhatsApp or iMessage or FaceTime? The number of places that somebody is online these days is quite a lot. Actually, I find it quite hard sometimes to call my friends because like I'm in between their calls. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So I'm
yeah,
trying to get people at the time that they're available between their Zoom calls, right? Like, and I've got,
yeah,
some friends and family that have Zoom as well, right? And so they use that now for kind of sort of the personal conversations as well. So it's a
yeah.
strange world, but yeah, like it is becoming a bit easier to get a hold of people. It is becoming a bit easier to create content quickly because you don't
Yeah.
need as much of a production. Like I think um, that like it's not only that people are forgiving right now in terms of the quality of production, but if it looks like you're not at home, that's a bit disrespectful, right? Like what? Like, so you probably shouldn't be there recording content right now. It's probably better to just be at home and make it okay for everybody to just be okay in being home, you know?
You know that BBC clip of that guy, Robert, somebody or other, who was the Korean analyst, and then this was about a year ago, and then at some point his daughter walks in, and there's like, because he's obviously working from home, and it was a whole big viral sensation at the time. And I'm like, we're all the BBC guy now, right? The chances of my kids walking in here are pretty high right now. Like, there's no guarantee they're not going to get involved in the conversation. And
Exactly.
I think every meeting I have, whether it be a client pitch or talking to suppliers or anybody, colleagues, like that is just a given in how we operate in this time and space. And I love the fact that everybody is forgiving about that because I think there's the general etiquette within the business world that you have an expectation things are always going to be at a certain level. And now we're
Yep.
kind of just all people, right? Things happen and you just have to accept that it is what it is, right?
Yeah, so there is like I do think there's like a general flattening, not of the curve, but yes of the curve as well, right? But
Yeah,
a flattening of or like a it's like almost an equality almost of like we're all at home, right?
yeah,
And so background shot is the background shot. You may
yeah.
go between some rooms, but you're not changing your background anytime soon, right? Like except if it's a virtual background on Zoom, right? But
Correct.
I think everyone's just kind of in this together. I was actually having a conversation the other day, and I was saying for the first time in a very long time, I think ever, like in my lifetime, we all have something in common,
Hmm?
right? The whole world
The whole
that's
world.
locked down
That's exactly
has
right.
something in common, right? And so now we can all relate. We can all be there, We understand the challenges. And if you have children, you understand what that means right now, right? Like you've
Absolutely.
got there is like there's just a shared experience right now, and I think it's interesting because forgiveness is high in production, like this style content, right? Before, you know, we put a lot of kind of effort into like the studio layout, right? With like
Yeah.
cameras and the things and the lights and everything like that, just to show that kind of standard, just to show that, hey, this is our standard, right? And that says a lot about you, right? Like that standard, right? Now that standard is gone, right? Like that is not there. So now your standard has to be the content. The content has to be the standard. And that's kind of like equalizer that I tried to poorly explain before.
I you're bang on right? It's exactly right. And I think it's so funny. I guess those individuals who've been operating out of perhaps less sophisticated premises have kind of now got a huge big up on everybody else because everybody's in the same position.
If they take action.
Correct. But to your point, I think you're bang on right. I think now it comes down to the actual content itself, because everyone, you've got your brand, and then what you deliver is much more important in terms of what it actually is rather than the way it looks. I think there's a lot to that, right? There's a lot to that. I think there's a lot of, look, I'm trying to be positive about the whole thing as much as you are, and I'm trying to think of all the positive spins that are going to come off this, because I think one thing is this is not going to last forever, right? This is in the grander scheme of things, this is a temporary blip, and it's going to be a hassle for all of us, but at the end of it, we're all going to come out with this collective experience. This morning I had a call with some guys in the States, and the discussion points to start with was, what does your lockdown actually look like? So are shops open or no, they're not open? Like, what is it? Then I got into the call with some guys in the UK, and it was the same thing. It was like, well, what does your lockdown look like versus mine? So we're all having this collective experience that looks kind of similar, but not exactly the same, but it is essentially the same thing. And we're just talking around the gradations of it, as opposed to, when the bushfires were on, I was getting calls of people like, well, what is it like? Or, are you experiencing them? And so that was a uniquely an Australian or even a New South Wales Victorian thing. Whereas now it's everybody. We're all in the boat together.
We're all in the boat together. So just a quick intro. Yeah. So today I'm speaking to Jethro Marks, the co-founder and the director at the Nile. Yeah. Which, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically has over 11 million SKUs. So it's an online store that has over 11 million products. Is that right?
32 million.
32 million. I got the data wrong. So it's basically increased 3 times since I saw a profile of you online, because I was trying to find out actually the size of the site. Yeah. Plus also, you've also now expanded into providing outsourced e-commerce support through a company that is called Mercury Retail. Is that right?
That particular business we've rebranded as Sort Hub.
Sort Hub,
correct.
As Sort Hub. Let me try that again, because I can edit it now, right? So just a quick intro. So today we're talking to Jethro Marks. He's the co-founder and the director at the Nile, which is one of Australia's largest e-commerce stores with over 32 million SKUs. And also the founder of a company called Sort Hub, which basically helps e-commerce providers to expand their operations. Is that the best way to explain it?
Correct. There are 2 parts to Sort Hub. The one is we provide an end-to-end service for brands that want to sell direct to consumer.
Yeah.
So typically a brand would be very good at marketing, would have a B2B supply chain, but won't necessarily have a direct relationship with the customer who buys their product.
Yeah.
What we do is we provide literally the ability to go in a very short space of time to a fully fledged D2C online model, direct to consumer, to be able to, we take care of the warehousing, of the fulfillment, the customer service. We do all the bits in between that allow that brand to basically present that it is the brand selling. And from the consumer's point of view, they're dealing with the brand, but we do all the heavy lifting in between.
So welcome, Jethro. Look, I think we just had like a 10-minute chat before we even started. But what's interesting is that you seem to be one of the lucky ones, right? Like I'm going to put it like basically like in like inverted commas, that have actually probably seen like an increase in performance since this whole thing started. Is that right?
Yeah, no, we have been exceptionally lucky in this regard. We landed on the right side of this due to no calculation of our own. It's just we happen to be in the right place at the right time with some commodities that people want to buy. And,
can I just put on that point, because that's like such a simplification of how you got to that point to be lucky. Because for people who don't know, you founded this back in 2003, right? So you're in business for 17 years to be at the right place at the right time and to be lucky enough to step in to this thing, right? So there's a bit of persistence behind it, right? And there's a bit of effort to get to the point where you have like a list of 32 million SKUs that are available so that at a time like this, you can see some growth. Now, like it's such a hard time across the world for so many organizations. So it's so good to speak to somebody that's actually achieving some success right now and is scaling up. And I think, fantastic on you. But how much has it actually increased? Like, because these are the questions that everyone I'm sure is asking, right? Because I just before this, I checked out the site, I checked out the homepage. Now we spoke, I think the first time maybe 2 months ago, right? And it was so hard to find a time to speak, and we kept saying next week. Anyway, so because we're now at home, we're kind of free, right? But before, your homepage was very different to what it is today. Like, because I had a look at the homepages before, and it's all about stuck at home, and it's all about kind of the board games and so on, and the puzzles and stuff like that. Yeah. So, how much has it actually kind of increased in the last 6 weeks?
I think the way to think about this is it's sort of Christmas in April would be the way to give a comp in terms of it. So April for us is April's typically quite a quiet month for us. There's no cyclical upswing. There's no events going on. There's nothing in all the commodities that we sell. There's really nothing that's sort of driving sales. It's just a base level sort of kind of quiet time of the year. And this looks like a very strong Christmas in April.
It's a very strong Christmas. It's a very strong Christmas. Yeah, because I see the charts for almost over Christmas, right? And it's like you get the whole year of sales like in the 1 month almost, right? Like it's okay, and then it's like bang, and it's a strong Christmas. So like it's a very good example of that. Is that right?
I think so. That's the best. I've been thinking about ways to how to analogize this, and I think that's the best way to describe it. So it's sort of, there are two things to it. I guess if you think about Christmas, it comes every year. We know when it's going to be. We prepare for it. We plan for it. We start taking on new staff in October, training them up. We start building out all the capability that we need over that period of time. We're just getting ready for it, right? Because it's going to come. And every year it sort of kicks off, and we don't know when the exact start date is going to be, but because at the moment it seems to be moving more and more into the earlier part of November. Yep. But you're pretty sure that by about the middle of November you're into it, and you're going to run until about the middle of December. In the middle of December, there gets to a point around the 15th where you have a bit of a cliff, and then a lot of customers cease to think that they can get their product, they can reliably get their product online, delivered by Christmas. And so we can talk about that. That's an interesting challenge of what you do in those last 10 days. Yeah. So you basically get like a 4-week window where you do a tremendous amount of business, and then try and deliver everything you can by Christmas to make sure that you're not not letting anybody down. This time, it didn't happen that way. This sort of has kicked off in a way that we didn't see coming. So it was a little bit like comparable to us having woken up on the 29th of November and suddenly realized it's the 29th of November and having forgotten about the fact that there's this event that happens every year. Which is a great problem to have. Like, I'm not diminishing the fact we have definitely become one of the lucky few, and I do reiterate my point. This was entirely, we were lucky. Like, I did not design in any way. I certainly hadn't thought months in advance what will people need at home to keep them busy and occupied and to entertain their children or whatever. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right product set, and I'm very thankful for it. But that is exactly what happened. So we've literally been playing catch up for the last few weeks to try and get on top of this, to be able to make sure that the expectations are being met, because when you're caught flat-footed, which is what we were, and I'm not lying about it, we were absolutely unprepared. You've got to quickly traverse it. Now, we've gone through all the similar travails that every other company has. We went remote on day one. We moved offices in 2 different countries remote immediately.
Yep.
which has presented its own challenges, but it's been very positive. Our warehousing has had to shift quite substantially in terms of the way they operate to make sure that we've got social distancing, multiple shifts. Being able to, I think we're doing close to double the amount of hours in the warehouse than we've ever done before per week, just to keep up with the demand, which is great.
So twice the amount of hours in the warehouse just to keep up with the demand, and that's basically like around the clock. Is that right? Is it 24/7 or is it?
We're at 2 times 8. We're at 16 at the moment.
16.
You can still use that last 8 hours if necessary, but in my experience, night shifts aren't that productive unless they're very, there's a lot of effort that has to go into making it work. So we're trying to just keep it going as best as we can within the confines of the sort of 16, 17-hour day.
Yeah.
And the team have really stepped up, like really impressed. We've had to scale up quickly, bring on some people, and they've done a great job. So far, look, it's working and we're getting on top of things, but it's challenging. Like I said, we're just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
And yeah, thank you for sharing. And so with the social distancing in the warehouse, what does that then do to the productivity of the packing and, the process overall?
Look, it is more challenging. I think the way we had it set up was pretty good in that, I can't exactly explain it in a way that would make sense, but the way that the desks and everything are laid out, there was almost the correct amount of space between them. So there wasn't a huge amount of infrastructural change we needed to make. It was just around processes and making sure that the staff were, spaced correctly, wearing masks, wearing gloves at all time, using sanitizer, and just, making sure that the protocols were baked in. I guess one of the key benefits this time around, normally when you put a safety, requirement in, a lot of the time people don't necessarily know what it's there for, can't really see the direct application of why they need to do something. In this particular instance, everybody's bought in on day one because everybody is fully aware of the fact that if they need to do these things in order to stay safe. So that's been really great. And I think that's helped. I don't know about you, but like within our remote workforce, the participation rate and the level of effort that people are putting in is really great from day one, which I didn't expect, because it's one of these things that you're always quite fearful of. If I move to a remote environment, how do I maintain the cohesion of my staff? How do I make sure I'm getting enough productivity out of everybody? And so that's always kind of been a deterrent for us to ever go into a fully remote environment. But it's one of these things, once you're thrown into it and everybody's bought into the idea and they'll like it, then all of a sudden you're like, why didn't I do this 5 years before? What do I actually need? What do I need offices for?
It's really interesting that there's been a lot of conversation about the remote style of work, but it's always so challenging to take the step or to take the plunge or to not have an office, and kind of how will that be seen? And like there seems to be a certain status about having an office. It's like, we'll have an office and it's basically this size and there's X amount of staff in that office, and it just doesn't come across the same way through Zoom. Like it does, it just doesn't, and so then again, it levels the playing field kind of thing, right? Where it doesn't matter how big or how small the office kind of has been in, right? It's about the value, it's about content and stuff like that. But I do think, like it's given us a chance to try this out, right? And see how this works, and to think, well, like, is my expensive office space actually worth the value that it gets back? Like, how important is it having people in the same office? Now, I think it's very important, but then is it like, cool, so is it that important above and beyond the benefits of actually having everybody like on the remote kind of stance, right? Instead, right? And so I think these conversations are now kind of happening, right? And I think, because quite a lot of organizations are having challenges economically, right? And so they're going to be looking at everything. And I'm sure the office space, like rents, they're at the top of the list, right? Like of kind of some of the costs sometimes, right? And I'm sure like for you with like all your warehouse spaces, I mean, you need your warehouses, but the offices, you know what I mean?
So I'll tell you why I land on this one, because I think there's a middle ground here, and I think I like everybody in the same space, because I think there's a dynamic that occurs when people are in the same space together that you can't there's just no replica. You can't, there's no technology I've seen yet that allows you to breach the gap enough of what face-to-face really brings.
Right.
Okay, but if we accept that that's kind of the perfect outcome, the remote working I'm becoming quite fond of as well, because I'm like, well, I've got some staff who travel up to an hour and a half to get to the office each day. I'm like, this gives them back 2 to 3 hours a day. Like, that's huge, right? That's massive. What they choose to do with it's up to them. But I mean, from a quality of life perspective, I think that's enormous. I think the ability to organize your day, as long as you can be productive, means that as long as you're available when people want you to be available, then why not just organize yourself accordingly, like when you look after your kids or whatever. So, you know, I'm running shift work at the moment. My wife runs a business too, and so we run shifts morning and afternoon. Who's going to do the homeschooling, and then everybody works in the evening, and we kind of all make it work. I'm not saying this is a perfect outcome, but it works. So I think the happy medium where it's going to end up is you end up with a partially remote working. So why should you be in the office 5 days a week? Like, come in a couple of days to spend time with your colleagues, and the rest of the time work from remotely. You know,
partially remote working. Interesting. So that means essentially the systems need to be set up to be completely remote.
Correct.
And it's optional to go into the office, right? Like that's how it would have to be set up, right? And then the office side of things would be there to really kind of establish that teamwork, establish that bond, and actually have the face-to-face time. But your company, like in that scenario, would need to be able to run completely remote.
Absolutely. So my wife.
And that's an interesting conversation, you know, because it's like now. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, my wife used to work for one of the big banks, and they had a hot desking environment for hundreds of people. And she used to lament it was just like it was an unworkable solution for so many reasons, mostly because they're under-resourced for the number of staff. Now I think about it, the model wasn't wrong. It was just premature. I think if you have a hot desking environment where it's fully kitted out for it, but then you are engaged, you have the ability to be fully remote, and then you overlay it with that, you actually get the best of both worlds, because you don't need to fully resource all the people because you've allowed people to work remotely. You've encouraged it, but at the same time, they've got the capability to come in and spend time with teams or whoever it is in an office environment. So I think my gut feel is that, to me, seems to make more sense. Like, so what that means for us is we could have a smaller footprint and have people rotating in and out rather than having to have a footprint where everybody's there or there is capability for everybody there. I mean, I'm thinking about this now, like, even before this all kicked off, there were a few weeks where there'd only be a couple of people in the office because everybody else was off, doing other things. I'm like, well, why don't we just accommodate for that outcome and make that the default solution? So to your point, fully remote capability, but with the view that they should or could operate face-to-face when necessary.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, certainly the world is changing right now in terms of the consumer behaviors, just from the business level and from the consumer level. But from the remote environment, what are some of the things which you've done to ensure that productivity stayed high or stays high?
Yeah, that's become probably one of the central themes. I guess in the first couple of weeks, it wasn't a big deal because everybody was really excited. I guess now we're into week whatever. Like, I've lost track of time.
It's Sunday, right? It's Sunday, it's Monday, it's Tuesday. Exactly, it's interesting.
Right. Yeah. It was on a Tuesday and whatever. But I think whatever week is now, I feel like it's becoming, now we're getting to the point where you've got to kind of continue to engage to make sure that people are actually engaging with you, that they're not just kind of allowing things to just slack off a bit. And I don't say that as a negative pejorative. I think it's just a natural tendency. If people aren't engaged, they're going to. They could be sitting in an office, be the same thing. So one of the things that I've taken is the idea that over communication is not a bad thing in this situation. Like, just over communicate as much as possible. So for the first time ever, I'm running weekly or fortnightly town halls where just addressing all the major issues from my perspective to the entire company. And that's the starting point. And then we just roll from there. We're engaged. We're on Slack. Slack's our tool, and everybody lives on there.
Same.
Making sure that there are certain things that everybody does to engage on Slack, like check in the morning. And I think one of the things it does is it's the same as when you walk into the office in the morning. Like, it just announces that I'm here and I'm now available to do whatever is necessary and to engage with you. Before that, I'm asleep while I'm there. But the moment I engage, that's it. I'm at work. Let's get started. And So, we've got multiple offices we've got a couple of offices in different countries. And so one of the things that I'm using this is an opportunity to try and breach some of those geographic gaps that have already existed, because, our North Sydney office talks to itself. Our offshore office talks to itself, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. And this is one of those opportunities where if we get this right, we actually get to level the playing field across the board and remove all the geographic constraints and just say, well, we're all part of the same company and we're all going to interact. And so what we're kicking off shortly is an opportunity to introduce one another to each other. And so they have profiles popped up across Slack to say, well, this is so-and-so, and this is what he's interested in or she's interested in. And all of a sudden humanize it for everybody else who may have been aware there was a person somewhere in the business, but didn't know who they were or what they did. So we haven't seen the results of this yet, but the gut feel says that this is probably going to be something to be quite good. Somebody explained to me the way that I like. They said, we've gone from having 2 offices to having 60 or 70 offices. So I'm like, all right, that actually makes sense, right? If you think about it from that context, it's like, okay, we do. So how would you bring 70 different offices together to talk the same language and to address the same set of problems and share and support one another as you go? And I think that becomes a really interesting challenge.
I tell you what's a challenge which we're working through is that, like, when you have an office, you can have quick conversations. You can just go up to somebody and just talk to them about something. You can just ask something. When everybody's remote, they're all meetings. It's because it has to be a meeting, because it's not like we have Zoom open 24/7 with everybody there. We can just go, hey, Jono, or hey, Sarah, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of like the amount of meetings has gone up significantly, right? So trying to find that balance where you're having the conversations and the communications happening, but there's also time to focus. And depending on kind of the type of organization that it is, some organizations, there needs to be like a lot of conversations happening sometimes, and sometimes Slack is not enough. So some of the things that we're doing right now is trying to block out times, just for meetings, and outside of that, it's completely flexible. Yeah. And so now it's not, we're trying to not have it be start at 9 until 5:30. It's like, no, we meet like at these specific times, and outside of those, you do whatever you want. But you need to perform. And there's ways that we can kind of check performance, right? But it's really kind of just saying, well, if we're going to be remote, let's be remote. Like how kind of like completely remote. Now that's not for everybody, right? It's just that we just need to overlap on kind of some things, right? But apart from that, kind of let's be flexible, But it's certainly opening up kind of other challenges of kind of having like far too many meetings, right? Like, and before we already had a lot of meetings before, but now it's gone up, right? Because we need to talk, right? Because of kind of how the teams operate, and sometimes Slack's just not enough, like you need the conversation.
Totally. I don't know what the silver bullet there is. I think like there's a couple of things to that. The one some of our tech teams were looking at having recurrent voice on all the time, like a voice channel on all the time, that they would mute and then just, they could drop in and out of. So it kind of emulates to some extent being able to turn to the guy to your left or the girl to your right and just have a conversation quickly.
Right.
I don't know, that's still being played around with. I thought about the idea of having recurrent video on all the time, but it might be seen to be a little bit intrusive. I think there's a bigger challenge there that you're addressing, which I think is really interesting. So think about conferences. The thing I like about conferences, it's not necessarily the content that you go to see there. It's the fact that there are people there who you would normally see once a year, once every 6 months. And when you had that, it would be a meeting, right? Meeting's a 1 hour event. It requires me or you to travel to one of the other offices or meet somewhere of a mutual agreement. Right. And whether we've got 10 minutes of discussion or not, we're there for an hour. I don't know why. It just seems to be the rule of the world. Like every meeting is an hour at least. In a conference environment, you have 6, 7, 8, 10-minute conversations because you bump into the person, and much more interesting stuff comes out of it because it's totally unscripted.
Right.
It's the same issue you're just describing, but now it's in an office environment. So it's kind of like, if you can find a way to solve that problem, you could actually do away with conferences. Like if there's a way to do that online, like that to me would achieve the networking outcomes that you need. And I don't know the right way to do it. I think maybe part of it, to your point, maybe part of it is just having an informality to be able to just, have those quick chats and just know that they're going to come through on a regular basis. But then to your point, maybe that's a bit disruptive. So I don't know, maybe the answer becomes like status settings, which says like either I'm here or I'm not here, or I'm ready to talk, or leave me alone, I'm busy working on something.
Yeah, it's interesting because that means then that, we need people to change their behaviors, right? And that's the hardest thing to change, right? And I think what we are being forced to do collectively as a global population is instantly change, right? So it's called the shock event, right? The shock event is like, you're home now and you have to stay home. That's it. Yeah. You can't do anything. So at first, I was I think it was this week or last week, I emailed about the 5 stages of grief. Yeah. And there's this interesting chart that shows the process that somebody actually goes through. And it's very similar to what I think the population is going through right now, is that shock event. And everyone's having to adapt right now. It's really quite fascinating. But just to come back to the Nile.
Sure.
Now, how are you actually handling all of the demand? Because overnight you've had to kind of step into like a second Christmas in April, right? Mm-hmm. And so now, you're probably not prepared for that, yeah? So what have you had to do to keep up with the demand?
Yeah, I think there's a few things to do. I guess there's what we can do internally, and then there's what our supply chain is capable of. Internally, it just means scaling up. So it was something that there was already a process in place for what to do. It just hadn't been done. So we've just moved in that direction. I guess, there's the addition of remote working in the office environment has proven challenging, because normally you would just put people in who would then get trained up in a buddy-like system, and they would have a quick acceleration path to get them up to speed very quickly in terms of how to do it. Now it's a bit more tricky because you've got to do training remotely. So that's proven kind of interesting, but it's opened up the door to then saying, well, there are other ways we can actually start this up. Now we're in the remote environment. We don't have to have people in the office. Are there ways that we can, there are other talent pools that we can drop into to bring people with their experience and who normally we wouldn't consider because they would insist on working in a remote environment. And there might be some great people out there. And so that we're working in that direction. But in terms of the scale up, it's just the process was already there. It just had to be done, and it just takes time. So we're kind of getting on top of that. The supply chain is more interesting because there's been an unprecedented amount of demand for product for which there wasn't that much demand ever. So a great example would be puzzles, right? Puzzles have just been
no.
I didn't even know we were in the puzzle business, but it turns out we are. We sell a lot of them. So we know.
Has that become the top one now? Has that become the top seller? I mean, I can see your homepage. If I can tell from your homepage says a lot by what's selling right now,
There's what you see there is pretty much what's selling. I mean, they're now a part of the whole part of it. I mean, it's once upon a time they were a recurrent evergreen seller that would sell on Christmas time, and now there's just a lot more demand for product like that. But I guess the point I wanted to make was that it's the supply chain around some of that product is not as robust because it hasn't been tested to the same degree. The product lines that we sell over Christmas and all throughout the year, we know how they respond. We know, everyone's get up for it. And so the challenge has been acquiring inventory to be able to sell, because there is the demand, but it's, there's not necessarily the stock to manage it. And the other challenge that's come up is that for the first time ever, there is global demand for the same commodities at the same time. So everybody wants that particular puzzle. So you're fighting for stock out of the supply base that is also going to North America and to Europe and to wherever else it goes, which then increases the cost of it and also decreases the amount of supply that you can get. So that is another interesting challenge that comes off the back of this.
So you're spending a lot of your time at the moment trying to negotiate the right kind of like deals. Is that correct? Like I'm just trying to kind of have like a guess of what that would actually entail, if that makes sense. Because the stock's available, you know, you've got thousands of orders, you know, if you could just close the gap, it's going to be there. Is that how it works, or is it something different?
No, there are a few lines like that. Most of your product we don't necessarily have a good supply base of at the moment, like stuff that we're just trying to get into. With the rest of it, it's not so much that. It's more about working with the suppliers to make sure that, you know, we have a good understanding of what inventory is actually available. So for us, like, if I can take this back a couple of steps, you know, you talked about the 32 million products. Like, I mean, for us, it's a data play, right? We need to have very good insights into what product is available at different times, because the supply goes in and out all the time across that product database. And I think what this is just an intensification of that, because we know what's sitting in our warehouse. We don't always have enough visibility of what's sitting in our supplier's warehouse. We don't necessarily have enough visibility of what's sitting in their supplier's warehouse, all the way up to the factory. So what we're doing now is not so much negotiating to try and, like, you know, just get stock lots of product in. It's more around saying, okay, you know, we've got this visibility. What else can we work with you guys to try and get some better insights into what's actually there that we can access, so that when we do sell this product, that we have a relatively high level of certainty that we can actually get it for the customer.
Yeah, sure.
And I think one of the positives that's going to come off the back of this, there's two things. One, for us, is just that there's you know, access to that data has always been quite difficult to get, because I don't think a lot of traditional B2B companies have really thought about the importance of that. It's just like, you know, if we can't supply today, we'll back order it, you'll get it when you get it. And that's always been quite difficult for us to explain that doesn't work in the online environment, where the customer has an expectation that if it's not met, they're not sitting around waiting for 6 weeks for the product. They'll just cancel the order and move on.
Right.
So I think hopefully there'll be a lot more understanding of how the data fits into all this and how it's important for us. Which will be great, because any improvements they can make in our supply base to that will only benefit us down the road and our customers.
Right.
The second thing is, I think that there are a lot of retailers who haven't necessarily prioritized online, because it's just been the add-on or whatever else it is, for whom now, because their stores are either closed or not as well visited, are having to make it first and foremost. And that's not a benefit to us, but it's just a benefit to the overall industry. I think what it will do is it will galvanize the next sort of wave of online investment, and then subsequently the customers will come. And I think people talked about it when Amazon turned up in Australia. This was going to be the Amazon effect, and obviously there was a wave of investment that did follow, and a lot of projects got greenlit and moved through. I think the Corona or the COVID effect is going to be that much greater. Like, I think it will open the door to a lot of new consumers who haven't historically bought online, will now experience it, will enjoy it. And for those customers who have been online, will now just reinforce the fact that this is the way to shop. I use myself as a great anecdote here, because I'm a terrible consumer. I can't stand shopping, even though I'm a retailer. I don't particularly enjoy the experience of shopping in general. I don't like going to stores, don't like doing it, but just don't like it at all. But now I've become the consumer I've always wanted to target and have as a customer of mine. I have deliveries, like, I don't know if you, but I have like 3 deliveries a day of every shape, shape, or form. I'm buying everything online. I don't want to leave the house. So anything has to come to me. And I can only assume that there are a lot more out there who are in a similar position. And I think that behavior is not going to go away. Like, personally, I'm not stepping foot in any store in the near future, even as infrequently as I used to. I probably won't in the future, because now I know it will come to me if I order it, which kind of seems a strange thing to say to someone doing what I do, but it's just not something that I ever kind of did. But now I am going to.
Yeah, I think the COVID effect, as you so nicely put it, has really forced everything online. You know, like let's say, for example, like even outdoor advertising, it's got no use right now. Really, because nobody should be outside. Anyone who is outside, there's just such a small percentage of people that are actually outside right now, and so now everyone, I think, is scrambling, if they already haven't, to ensure they have like a really solid kind of experience online for customers, right? You know, for consumers and so on. But that's kind of like your secondary business, right? And so you seem to be in like the fortunate position that the main thing is doing well, but then the secondary thing, which is supporting kind of e-commerce providers in terms of their infrastructure, that would also, I would assume, just be like in demand right now. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're working with a number of brands to bring them online, and to have the capability to talk and to sell to their consumers. I think one of the positives that has come off this is there's been a general frustration. There's been a general growing frustration that they didn't have enough of a communication with their customer directly. I think given in certain categories like grocery, for example, just how like online got switched off for a while, like now it's kind of coming back online. Those products just weren't getting to customers other than if they went to the supermarkets. And I think that's amplified the frustration that a lot of these brand managers and brand owners have kind of felt. And certainly that's something that we want to assist them with, because that's what we can and are aiming to do. But I think what it will do further is just reinforce the fact that these brands can sell online, can have a direct-to-consumer model, aren't necessarily going to experience the channel conflict that's probably prevented them up until now. And our anticipation is that curve will go further up. I mean, it's already was starting, but I think it will just accelerate. I think on a more general level, I think what we're seeing is not so much a redefinition of a lot of behaviors. It's just about the amplification of processes and things that are already going on. So the trend was already moving online. It just has pushed that much harder. To your point around the advertising. Although, sorry, on that point, I must just segue to say that if someone were to advertise on any running trail anywhere in any of the major parts of Sydney, I think they do really well, because I went out for a jog this morning. I was astonished at how many people are out there just walking dogs and running.
As long as you're advertising something that's like supports people who like to exercise.
There seems to be a lot more people out at the moment. Like I guess that everyone's at home, but there just seems to be a lot more dog walkers and everything else. So I think there's a missed opportunity for getting some billboards on the Bay Run or anywhere else around Sydney where there's a large number of people. But I just think, so, and I think the remote working that we talked to earlier, I think these are trends that already were there. I think all that's happening is like, it's just amplified it up. And so we're going to see a lot more occur a lot faster. The analogy I think about, because you mentioned like this is shock treatment.
Shock event. It's a shock event, and then the things happen, and then there's the process of what people go through.
Event. So I kind of think this is a little bit like having a child for your first child. Like it's like you go through that experience where you had no idea what you were in for, and then you have your first child, and then for the first 12 weeks especially, you go down this steep learning curve that you've never thought even existed, let alone have to go down.
Where time stops completely, and you don't know what day it is, what time it is. Like, have you slept that much recently? Exactly. It's all over the place, right? It's actually not a bad time to have had a child right now, right? Because you have to be at home, But so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people and businesses out there that are now saying, wow, this e-commerce thing is big now, and I'm going to get into it. Yes. Like, to those people, like, what would you say is the best way to start? Because like you started now 17 years ago, and now you have like a huge e-commerce shop. But there's a lot of organizations that are going to be looking to start now. And this is also kind of the thing which you help them with as well, right? Like in terms of the second business, right? So like, could you share some advice to people that are now considering this strongly?
No, absolutely. So I think the first thing is the best day to have done this was yesterday, and the next best day is today. So just get into it would be the first thing. I think I reflected on this the other day. When we started out, there was no cloud, there was no SaaS, there was no Shopify. At the time that we started, our options were Yahoo stores, which was, I don't even know if it exists anymore. Like,
I remember Yahoo stores. I'm that old as well. Yeah.
Or it was like full on enterprise software, which today, by today's standards, was pretty primitive. But at the time that was like, and so, starting out as 3 24-year-olds with $5,000 in the bank and 3 computers, that was never going to be the case. So we had to build our own and do it all from scratch. Yep. Today, I mean, you can get a Shopify store for next to nothing. You can get started. The tools are all there. Cloud, I mean, everything should be in the cloud if it's not in the cloud. One of the things that I'm very thankful we did was 5, 6, 7 years ago, move everything into the cloud 100%, because it has meant the move to remote has been has been painless from that perspective. There are other pain points, but that hasn't been it. And I think the key is to just get in and test and learn. I mean, if the cost of entry is so low, the cost of scaling up is expensive. Like once you get to a certain point, it does become pricey, but the cost of getting in and testing is not that high. It just requires a bit of time and a bit of effort to get it in. And I think, the tools are all out there and there's a ton of material as to what you can and can't do. Leverage the marketplaces. Like we started our business on eBay today. eBay is a big chunk of what we do. We recently got over the 1 million feedback. We're, I think, the third company in Australia to get that. We're very happy with that.
Congratulations.
Part of our business. Thank you. And I
how many stars is that? Or what's the color of the star? Like at 1 million? Is it like a diamond star? I don't know. Sorry, anyway, I cut you off for something not important.
Right. There is some emblem, I just don't know what it is, but I'm sure it's very impressive. But I think the key there is that, we talked about the flattening, the democratizing of everything. I mean, that's an environment where, so any new entrant can come on and compete with me head to head. Like there's no obstacle. You can run your Shopify store, you can advertise on Google, you can go to Facebook, Instagram, and like for a fairly limited amount of investment, you can get up and running very quickly. And it just comes down to the question of what is it that you're selling, and is there a compelling reason why someone should want to buy from you? And then can you fulfill those expectations? I'll make it sound really simple. It's a little bit more complicated, but I mean,
it's a little bit more complicated, and making it profitable and all that type of jazz. But so would you recommend Shopify? I mean, that seems to be the one out there at the moment that everyone's into. It seems to have all of the customizations, optimizations, all of the plugins, add-ons. Is that the one which you would recommend?
I think the way we see it is it's a three-way race between Shopify, BigCommerce, and Neto.
Okay.
Neto, I would recommend if you want to trade primarily, let's say, on eBay. Their integration there is pretty sound. If you want to run your own store, then it comes down to BigCommerce and Shopify. And you decided to use Shopify. Technically we just preferred the tools that are available on it better. So I can only speak from experience of having used that.
Sure.
So far, it seems to be pretty good. What I like about it is that the cost of entry for a very well-spec product is very low. So coming into it, you get like what once upon a time would have been Enterprise Plus. And today is just available for $50 a month or whatever the cost is. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. Quick one. So at the moment with the Nile, so like, are you running any ads, or is it all organic traffic at the moment?
No, we advertise everywhere.
You advertise everywhere. And so what are you seeing in terms of performance? Because I'd love to hear like your experiences from an e-commerce perspective.
So the conversion rates are definitely up on the categories that are selling well. There's a lot more interest and a lot more activity. So I think the buyer intent is is comparable to what we see around the big events. So I kind of just reflect back on, say, Cyber Monday, Black Friday, which has now become like the peak of the Christmas period, as of I think last year. And what we see there is like you can run an event, but you don't necessarily need to. You just need to be in the space at the time because the buyer intent is so great. It's one of those times where you don't have to coerce it or convince anybody to come and have a look. Everyone's out there looking for deals and looking to shop. And I think the behavior at the moment seems to be relatively consistent. Obviously, the motivation's a bit different. They're not necessarily looking for the deal. They just need what they need. But there are enough eyeballs out there looking for stuff that they can't get elsewhere. And so we're seeing on a performance basis, purely metric basis, it looks fairly similar.
And so that's the same across both Facebook and the Google network? Is that the same, or is it more skewed towards search than display on Facebook in terms of kind of advertising performance?
I'll speak primarily from a search perspective. So from a search perspective, that's what we're seeing. Display, I'm not as across on the detail of.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. It's really interesting, that point as well, which you just said around like, there's just a demand right now. Like we changed our whole approach 2-3 weeks ago because all of a sudden overnight, the thing that we were the thing that we were selling was just not interesting anymore to people. That just wasn't a part of kind of their needs. And so we were like, okay, cool. So we have all these resources and we have all these capabilities and so on. Of course, how can we help people? And then we came up with something that talked to the current environment. And now all of a sudden there's a need that we're filling. And it's the first time in my life that I haven't had to create the need first, then fill it, to say, yeah. You could get marketing elsewhere, but what you really need is this kind of marketing because of this reason. And by the way, that's what we do, right? And but like now it's like, hey, you're stuck and you don't know what to do. Hey, we can help.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So what's interesting is that if you can find the untapped needs right now and fill them, there's a business there that will just scale. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that overnight, so many companies, they are not fulfilling a need anymore. And they're trying to find their way, but it's so good if you can find it, because the demand is there and it's amazing.
I think, that speaks to your entrepreneurialism that you guys have been able to do that. I mean, kudos to you. That's awesome. I think
it's really difficult, to be clear.
No.
Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. But yeah,
totally. Pivoting is never an easy process. I mean, it's just but you've got to adapt to the situation. I think coming back to the shock event analogy again, I think that's a great way to think about it. Once something's happened, there are two approaches. You can either sort of keep doing what you're doing in spite of the fact that it's not working, or you try and find an alternative thing to do which may render a reward. And I think that's exactly what you've done, and that's amazing. And I think that should be the default setting for everybody. It's like, okay, yesterday was yesterday, and today is a different day, and the world has shifted, and what are we going to do about it? And I think any company, I see a lot of companies doing this, who are sort of taking that viewpoint, are on the road towards finding whatever it is that next kind of growth curve, wherever it's going to come from. I think the $64 million question, which is we're thinking about, and I'm sure everybody else is, like, how long is this actually going to go on for? Are we seeing, like, to come back to the Christmas analogy, is this just a blip in the in the cyclical period that we go through, and then we come back and then we're back to normal? And would that be 6 months time, a month's time, 18 months? Is this a total shift? Like, are we seeing a shift in the way behaviors work? And it's very hard. And I think being able to kind of understand or take a viewpoint on that, because you couldn't even be right, who's got a crystal ball, is important, because it helps guide the decision-making process that's carry on. Like the example you gave, do you stop doing everything you've done and dismantle all the capability to focus on this new thing? Or do you just park most of it, assuming that at some point the demand will come back for what you had before? And I'm thinking about the similars, like, should we be scaling up substantially across the board in anticipation that the growth is going to go on indefinitely? Or do we take the view that this is a temporary thing and we just need to kind of accommodate for the period that it's going to go on for, but accept that at some point there's going to be a resumption of where we were before, or a move back to normality as such?
Yeah, look, it's such a great thing to think about, right? Like, I think for us, it's a service-based business, right? So a service-based business is based on its people and its processes and then its capabilities, but how that's applied and how that is sold is completely flexible. It's harder for a company that sells stuff, but that stuff, that part is flexible. The systems, but all the logistics and all that stuff, that's that part that that could be applied in certain ways, right? And so it's really asking yourself those questions on, cool, so I have these assets, I have these resources and these processes. How else is it possible to apply these to fill like a big need? Because if you can do that, there's a lot of need out there right now,
Totally. And it's global as well, right? So if you've got a way to kind of service customers globally, everyone's sort of the central theme of our discussion, like everybody's experiencing the same thing at the same time. There are businesses all over the world who are having the same set of questions and issues. And if you're a B2B provider or you're a service provider, your ability to access those entire markets is now open as well, because people are probably a lot more amenable to a new service provider over Zoom than they would have been before, where they insisted on seeing you in person. It wasn't required anymore. So they literally configure correctly, and like you could go after a global audience quite quickly.
I think the challenge, as soon as you have something that's working, is focus, because now the amount of opportunity, like, to companies that have the opportunity is so big, right? And so, but that's a whole nother podcast discussion itself, right? Cool, Jethro, we are out of time. This has been our time. I try to be on time because everyone's like on Zoom calls now, back to back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for coming on to the podcast and in terms of being so open with everything. Congratulations on kind of like this whole thing actually helping you. That's so lucky. But I mean, like, it's got to happen to somebody, and you're such a nice person. So that's fantastic that's happened to you, you know.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
If companies actually just need support in terms of e-commerce, I mean, how can they get in touch with you?
We're just redoing the websites at the moment. So the best idea at the moment is just find me on LinkedIn, ping me. I'm always receptive. Jethro Marks, Nile. I'm the only Jethro Marks in the Nile that you'll be able to find. So it's pretty easy. And we're totally open. And then, once the branding is all complete, we'll have a new site and everything will be up. But in the interim, that's the best way to do it.
But it sounds like you're busy, and I understand why. I think I'm going to go now and buy a couple of puzzles because I thought they were sold out everywhere, but not from the Nile, huh? So I can still get them from you.
Get in there quick. Yeah.
Get in there quick.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
see you, Jethro. See you, mate.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Growth Manifesto podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. For more episodes, please visit growthmanifesto.com/podcast.